There's never been an opportunity for Donald Trump to get his way with Russia, ever. This was always pie in the sky thinking. There was a chance for the United States to put pressure on Ukraine to accept reality and to put pressure on Europe to stop reinforcing stupidity. And this could have brought about peace, and Donald Trump would have gotten a lot of credit for that peace, but the peace would have been 100% on terms dictated by Russia. Everybody needs to remember, Russia didn't start this war. This war was thrust upon Russia by the collectives, by the United States, by Donald Trump, the policies of the first Trump administration. During that time, Russia was actively working to fulfill the promise and the potential of the Minsk Accords. And it was the United States that continued to send lethal weapons to Ukraine, to train the Ukrainian army to NATO standards for the sole purpose of confronting the Russian separatists and Russian forces in the Donbass region. And according to the pie in sky thinking of the Ukrainian politicians and their CIA and MI6 masters, Crimea as well, to push Russia to its 1991 frontiers. Trump is to blame here. He's the man who made this possible. The Russians were going to cut slack. And unless it's premised upon sound diplomacy that seeks peaceful coexistence in terms that are acceptable by everybody, it has no chance of survival. And its creation will only lead to conflict that could lead to the destruction of Armenia and the destruction of Azerbaijan. Actually, Hegseth did. In the aftermath of the 12-day war between Iran and Israel, Hegseth took a look at the expenditure of munitions and the drawdown that's already taken place in American stockpiles, and he said, we're not sending anything else to Ukraine. He was overridden. The man who seems to be in charge now is Mike Ratcliffe, the director of the CIA. I mean, there was a meeting where Donald Trump turned to Ratcliffe, bypassing Hegseth and saying, hey, what, are we going to be able to get those weapons there? No, it's all a lie. Again, everything about Trump is a lie. 17 Patriot batteries to full complement. They don't exist. But the point is, Ratcliffe took the lead on this, not Hegseth. I believe the Pentagon continues to be staffed with professionals who their job is to lay out the reality of war. The attack on the Russian strategic bombers was a British affair run by British intelligence, maybe backed by the CIA. The CIA is a rogue entity right now, absolutely rogue, out of control. And I think what Trump is doing right now is turning to the irony here, turning to Ratcliffe into the Russian Mission Center and saying, turn up the screws. Tends to forget it was the Russian Mission Center that helped create the BS narrative that was used to weaponize against him, or at least aspects of it. There was a briefing held at Congress. The CIA went around and briefed. And I ended up talking to a very senior Democrat who was present at this briefing. And I said, I know you can't give away national secrets, and I wouldn't ask you to, but the Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, they all say that the CIA assessed that Russia was bluffing. I said, is that what the CIA said? Did they believe that Russia was bluffing about the nukes? And this very senior Democrat said, no. The CIA said the exact opposite, just not bluffing. That if these ATACMS are used, Russia, if the wrong targets are hit, Russia will use nuclear weapons against NATO. He said that's not the scary part. The scary part was the Biden administration, senior Biden administration people in the briefing saying, we're ready for this. So Buchanan's briefing wasn't just theoretical. Buchanan's briefing was, we're ready to go to war. And there are people saying there was a better than 50% chance we were going to have a nuclear war at the end of last year. Better than 50% chance. The only thing that saved it was Donald Trump coming out. He gave a Time magazine interview where he said, if I'm president, I won't continue this ATACMS thing. And that allowed the Russians to say, okay, we don't need to go into nuclear war right now. We'll wait for the new president to come in and he'll end this stupidity. American politics has broken the United States of America. The politics of getting elected and staying elected has corrupted everything. There was a time when there's a reason why our founding fathers made the Senate term 6 years. They were supposed to be elected, not have to worry about continuous cycles of re-election. They could have time to think, free of the political pressure, the old wise men, now old wise women, and all this stuff. But that's not how this works, because even as a senator, you have to play the party game. You have to be raising money for the party. You have to be pimping for the party, your party. That means that never once do you ever get to do what's right for America. And I will tell you right now, there's not a senator out there that does what's right for America. Every senator does what's either right for the representatives. They only do that which will get them reelected. There's a handful of exceptions who have such a very strong base of support that they can do things. Marjorie Taylor Greene, Massey, these are exceptions, but the vast majority of them are so insecure as to their position. And they keep looking at the upcoming midterm election. My God, how do I stay in power? What do I need to do to raise the money to stay in power? They don't read the bills. They do what the system tells them to do. And they also have to manage the political collapse of Ukraine. It has to be done in a manner which is conducive to full implementation of the Russian plan. If you create a vacuum too quick, Europe might panic and seek to fill that vacuum. And now you have a greater conflict. You need the collapse to be handled in a managed fashion, because I believe that the next president of Ukraine might be named Azarov, the former prime minister who is heavily involved in the Union State right now. Why would a former prime minister of Ukraine be involved in the Union State? Because I believe the future goal, the Russia goal for Ukraine's future is to have Ukraine to be a member of the Union State. To make that happen, though, you need things to fall into place. That means that you have to manage the political collapse of Ukraine so that you can rapidly insert what you want. You can't have a vacuum appear out of nowhere before you're ready to move in. So the Russians are playing a very complicated game. They're not driven by the calendar. This game went because Russia's looking at the long term. In the long term, they need Ukraine to be stable and part of the Union State. That's Russia's goal and objective, even though they haven't stated it. I believe it is, because that gives Russia the maximum security, the maximum stability, and it keeps Europe forever out of Ukraine, which is very important. But they now have to pull these forces away from Zaporizhia or maybe up by Izium, bring them down, but there's no one to replace those gaps. And so now the Russians, because they have manpower superiority everywhere, push forward there. Again, not the big arrows, just a village here, a village here. As Garland Nixon likes to say, every morning you wake up, and there's just another story about a Russian soldier raising a Russian flag over a village or town in Ukraine that you can't pronounce. That's the reality. Every morning, Russian flags are going up all across. And that's the way this war is going to go until it's over. These are some of the worst advisors in the world, giving the worst advice in the world to the dumbest president of the world about things Russian. Now he has Lindsey Graham whispering in his ear as well. Donald Trump is a narcissistic egomaniac. We have to remember that. And if it has to all be about Donald Trump, this is a man who viewed the Russian-Ukrainian conflict not in terms of saving lives. What a hypocrite. He's providing the weaponry that not only kills Russian soldiers, but gets more Ukrainian soldiers killed. He facilitates the continued flow of weaponry into Ukraine that just lengthens this war, complicates this war, but doesn't change the inevitable outcome. The man most responsible for deaths in Ukraine today is Donald Trump. He could have brought this war to an end. You can't expect Russia in an existential struggle, and this is indeed an existential struggle for Russia, to say, oh, we'll do what the United States wants us to do, even though the United States started this war back in 2014 or even going back further. Russia has a long memory. They know exactly what's happening here. They know exactly what's at stake here. And they're not going to surrender to the United States. They're not going to yield to Donald Trump. So what we're seeing here is Donald Trump throwing a temper tantrum. Again, he's being poorly advised, and we could have. But right now, I don't think we can compete with the Chinese in Brazil. I think the Chinese have us beaten hands down. And we're just screwing it up, too, by threatening Brazil with secondary sanctions. Didn't Lula just say, if you don't want to trade with us, we won't trade with you. We don't care. And why? Because they got a Chinese trading partner right now that'll pick up all the slack. And it's not theoretical. The biggest port in Peru is able to fill the Brazilian market with whatever. I think that's one of the simplistic world visions that exists in Washington, D.C. today, is that the United States can somehow repeat what Richard Nixon and Henry Kissinger did with China and the Soviet Union back in the 70s to drive a wedge between the two. Look, if you get into purely academic exercise, there's no doubt that there's a tremendous amount of fear inside Russia about China. You go out to the Russian Far East, and it's one of the most thinly populated regions in the world, right across the border, 1 billion Chinese. And they're very concerned about getting swamped by the Chinese. So there's always some sort of hesitation there. Post 2022 changed this. I traveled to Novosibirsk in 2023 and saw the economic miracle that is Novosibirsk, and saw the extent to which Chinese investment played a role in this economic miracle. I think the Russians and the Chinese now have worked their way through systemic racism. The Russians were racist against China. And I don't mean in terms of black and white here in America, but there was a prejudice against the Chinese. Not anymore. China has stepped up to the plate. China has been there for Russia. The Russian economy today is succeeding because of China. You could see it. Again, this is anecdotal. And I don't know if you could testify for Congress that this is the game-winning argument, but they inch us towards a nuclear war. All of this disguised as patriotism and making America great. It makes America weaker, because here's the other reality is that nothing Graham is proposing is going to succeed. It's going to fail dramatically. I think even Trump recognizes that if he goes out and he tries to do all these sanctions that are being threatened, it will fail dramatically. And then he'll be the one who, has mud on his face. But no, these people don't think they're helping America. Lindsey Graham knows who he's helping. He's helping Lindsey Graham. He's helping his cabal of American politicians who have sold their soul to the military-industrial complex. That's what he's doing. This isn't about helping America or making America great again. This is about weakening America for the benefit of Lindsey Graham. And that has to be watched out in any business. But there's no strings attached when it comes to, you have to put a military base here, you have to do this, the CIA is going to come and ask you for favors here. That's how we work. We can't do a clean business deal with anybody. Brazil, every time we want to do a business with Brazil, there are strings attached to that deal. And the Chinese are just like, now the Chinese are smart, because they understand that if you become heavily involved in the trade of Brazil, certain things happen automatically. You don't have to ask for them to happen. They just happen because it's the smart thing to do. And China will become more heavily involved in it. But the amount of infrastructure development that China can bring to bear. And when you talk about green economy, in the West, that's become a dirty word because of the way the Greens have ruined Europe. In the United States, underfunded, it gets a bad rap. China is one of the greenest places in the world right now. They are rapidly transitioning on a scale. And if you can take that and bring it to Brazil, maybe the savior of the Brazilian rainforest will be the Chinese. Maybe. It ain't going to be America. It's not going to be Europe. The Chinese seem to have a solution. And I wish it was the United States taking that lead. I'm an American. I'm proud of being an American. I wish we were the ones doing that. You will collapse like a house of cards. It's just stupid. The Armenians are being stupid. The Azeris are being stupid too. Because the Azeris have to understand that while they have energy and all that stuff, Russia can take out their pipelines in a second. It's simple. Azerbaijan's not a superpower. And everybody talks about Azerbaijan able to threaten the Azeri population of northern Iran. That sword cuts two ways. Just want to remind people of that sword cuts two ways. And you want to play the ultimate game of national survival, Baku could become an Iranian city if you're not careful. So this is the stupidity that's taking place here, because the West is raising the stakes in this conflict with Russia to existential proportions together with Iran. I wouldn't have talked about Iran making a move into Azerbaijan prior to the bombing of Iran's nuclear facilities. But now we're literally in a situation where the rest is threatening with Iran with its survival as a modern nation state. And when done in that light, you can't predict the future. And that's the danger here. This Zangezur corridor isn't going to be what people think it's going to be. It's not going to turn into this thing that makes Turkey the new Ottoman Empire. It's actually 43 kilometers of vulnerability. It's not very wide. American leasing doesn't provide any guarantees of security. It can be cut in a heartbeat. If he thinks for a second Russia gives one rat's ass about the threat of sanctions, he doesn't know Russia, nor does he understand China, nor does he understand anybody else, any of the other players out there. What we do know is as we speak, the Ukrainian government is at risk. The confidence in Volodymyr Zelensky is plummeting. And if reports coming out of the Russian intelligence service are true, there's meetings taking place in Switzerland behind the back of Zelensky to have him replaced with Zelensky. who would just be another failed leader. Because again, it doesn't recognize reality. Let me just tell you what the reality for Ukraine is. Ukraine will be strategically defeated by Russia. The current government will not exist, either in terms of the presidency or the construct of the Rada, Ukrainian parliament. There will be new elections, and these elections will produce a pro-Russian government beholden to Russia that will seek to transform Ukraine from the failed proxy of the West that it currently is into a member of the Union state. Ukraine will become, like Belarus, a partner of Russia in the framework of what they call the Union state. It's not the Soviet Union, it's something different, but Ukraine will forever be attached to Russia, to Belarus, to the East. It will never be part of Europe. That's the reality. But it also is designed to bring about a loss of confidence on the West in Ukraine, to starve it economically. Because if you can start denying Ukraine the only thing that keeps their economy going, which is foreign aid, now you have economic collapse. So you have military collapse at the front, you have economic collapse, and then you're looking for political collapse. And that's the other thing that's happening right here with the demonstrations in the street. We're looking at the demise of Zelensky. He's on his way out. When all this is going to happen, I don't know. I can tell you it's happening. The Russians, they have to play a very sophisticated game here. A lot of us look at the battlefield and say, why aren't they doing more on the battlefield? Because the Russians have to be prepared for what happens if Trump does put sanctions on. You know, if you do too much on the battlefield, you can not only solidify the resistance in Europe, but you can also alienate those who support you. Some, like North Korea, I don't think will ever be alienated. The Chinese now are more and more on Russia's side, but there's a period of time there where the Chinese were like, we really want to support you, but we're not fans of this war. And so if Russia overreacted, did too much on the military front, they alienate the Chinese. They need that foundation. So the Russians are managing all of this. Donald Trump wants the Nobel Peace Prize. That's what this is all about. And he's frustrated because Vladimir Putin is denying him the peace prize that Donald Trump deserves. The Russians are fighting a war of attrition based on gradual gains on the battlefield designed to inflict as much harm on the Ukrainian military as possible while minimizing the harm done on the Russians. That means that this war could be a forever war. If the Ukrainians can sustain the attrition to the point that they don't break, then it just continues to grind. But then this war is also an economic war. We see that their economy is gone. They literally have no economy. It's totally subsidized by the West. And so now it becomes a political problem in the West. How, from the Russian perspective, how do we get the West to start squeezing Ukraine? And let's dig into this Russian report released by the SVR, I think today. They say some interesting things in there. I personally view this as an information operation, meaning that no intelligence service freely publishes classified information for the good of the public. They don't. Tulsi Gabbard isn't releasing the information about Russiagate because it's in the public interest. She's doing it for political purposes. She's serving her political boss. He wants it released because it's good for him.